Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by author Rodney Phillips. Rodney is the author of Dissension. He was born in Pittsburgh, and he basically is going to be talking about how dissension can, we think there are a lot of things in life that can cause breakdown in communication or, breakdown in morality or society. But he talks about how he feels that dissension is one of the main things that can cause this issue. So we're going to be talking to Rodney about his book and everything that he's up to and going to be up to. So, Rodney, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Curtis, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and I really appreciate it. As Curtis said, I'm the new author of Dissension, a disagreement that leads to discord. It's about a young lady that's going to college in my University of Miami. It's set in Pittsburgh and Miami, and she's studying criminal law. She gets caught between a war that breaks out between two rival drug cartels. And as you'll find out through the book, why they specifically start targeting her. And she has a huge growth arc. So basically, I have two strong female characters. My main character and my main FBI agent are caught in the middle of a male-dominated war. And what ends up happening is the name of the book is Dissension, a disagreement that leads to discord. And these cartels were at peace, and then something happens to trigger that, and the conflict then arises and grows from there.
Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you?
Yeah, sounds great. So I am Rodney Phillips. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and have lived here my whole life. I am currently a oncology pharmaceutical representative, which I've done for well over 20 years. I also coached youth football and youth girls and youth boys lacrosse for over 20 years. And it's funny with this book is I started writing it when I was 19 years old and on notebooks and postcards, and it sat in my office file cabinet for 37 years. Until both my children went to college and I wasn't coaching anymore. And my wife said, you're driving me crazy on the weekends. Can you find something to do? And I said, well, maybe I'll pull my book out and see what I have. And I started carving out time on Saturday and Sunday mornings and having a coffee and basically having an appointment with my book. And then, it ended up getting published here about 4 weeks ago or so, and looking forward to the sequel as well. So the publisher had me start the sequel in April. So I've been working on that as well for the last 6 months or so.
Well, what are you most proud of with the characters in your book?
Yes, so that's a great question, Curtis. I feel like one of the things that I'm most proud of is I had mentioned, that I have two strong female characters. I have a daughter and I have a son, and I believe in, strong females and them being able to handle themselves. And that's what I tried to create with those characters in specific. So that's probably what I'm most proud of. The other thing that's been interesting is I've done a multitude of book clubs over the last couple of weeks where they invited me as the author to come in and talk to the book clubs. And the passion that they have about the characters that I created was inspiring. Like obviously I, created these characters and I like them and I, have a lot invested in them. But to hear other people that are reading the book and how they're, really invested in some of the characters was really cool to see.
Well, I know the story starts with a disagreement that spirals out of control. So why do you think that people are drawn to stories of power and downfall?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, really, conflict doesn't really destroy the connection, but it escalates. It escalates it, if you will. And I think people are drawn to that because that's real life, right? You have disagreements, you have discussions that don't go the way that you feel like they should have went. And I feel like it's human nature. We're not, in my opinion, nobody's 100% positive all the time, right? You're going to have some disagreements, but I think communication then becomes the key to that, and if you're able to communicate, then you can move forward. Where in this particular case, between the leaders of these cartels, they just lost communication, and it escalated.
Well, loyalty and deception seem to run side by side in your book. So how did you manage to balance that between your characters?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Curtis. I think what I tried to do with balancing the loyalty is, um, creating characters that had flaws, but they also were loyal to certain other characters in the book. So I felt like that was a key concept of keeping these, because you have two cartels, right? That they're loyal to each other, and I think loyalty keeps that authority in place, if you will, and make sure that they're moving in lockstep. So I think that portion of it, was my mindset going into writing about the cartels, was that they had that loyalty on both sides. And then as far as my main character's loyalty, um, she was born, she was born that way. She's played sports, growing up, and really had loyalty to her family, loyalty to her friends. And that's one of the key characteristics that she displays, is loyalty. And then, like I said, I tried to make sure that every character had flaws as well. So you'll see that as you read through the book, and different flaws that you pick up with the different characters. But I think that loyalty concept as the backbone really helped to drive then the disagreement, or the dissension, if you will, that happened, because then they just dug their heels in and stayed loyal to where they were at, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So when you write a book of crime and conflict, do you have an ending in mind, or do you let the story take its course and bring you to the ending?
Yeah, so that is interesting that you bring that up, because I was just talking about that at a book club recently, and I had a good amount of the book already written. So I would say probably, let's call it 80% of the book was handwritten, and then I ended up typing it into the computer, and then I wrote from there. So then that back end, really, I let the story flow. I had a certain idea of where I wanted to get to, and I had an outline and things of that nature, but I really let my thought process and the flow of the characters and the dialogue and the interactions that the characters had, I let that really create the flow of the back end of the story.
Well, what made you want to dive into the human flaws of betrayal, pride, and moral conflict?
I think it's a little bit of what we talked about. It's human nature, right? You're not always going to have harmony. There is going to be conflict or disagreements, or things that you don't understand, and I feel like those are emotions that we go through a lot as humans, and our interactions with friends and family and colleagues, they're not always going to be positive, right? You are going to have a lot of positive, and majority of the time it is positive, but you are going to have those disagreements from time to time. And I think, like I said at the beginning, is communication, I think, then becomes the root of that. If you look at like marriages, for example, I think, in my opinion, communication is probably one of the biggest keys that keep people together for a long period of time. Because I feel like when you stop communicating, then the people give up, if you will.
Well, let's talk about, your title says a lot. So explain what dissension means to you as a writer and as a person.
Yeah, so in the title, a disagreement that leads to discord is actually the definition of dissension, and I wanted that on the title specifically because of these two cartels were at peace for a long period of time, and then something happens in the book that triggers the questioning of that peace. And as roll through the book, you'll find out like why that triggered it. And then they unfortunately then become more criminal, more violent. They start hunting my main character, Kylie. She doesn't know why she's caught in the middle of this conflict. And then there's a couple twists that go with the book, and you find out why specifically they started to target her. But she has a huge arc curve to her growth. Is she's a normal college student, going to school, and then all of a sudden she's fighting for her life, and she's on the run, and so she has a huge arc to her growth because she has to grow up very quickly in a very short period of time.
Well, talk about in your book how you keep realism and suspense balanced without it turning sensational or even predictable.
Yeah, so what I tried to do there is I have a lot of short chapters that kind of keep the flow of the book moving. So, there's a lot going on, obviously, in the book because I have two cartels, then I have my main character, and then I have the FBI. So, how I tried to write the book is one chapter will be on one cartel, the next chapter is on the other cartel, then the next chapter's on my main character, the next chapter's on what's happening with the FBI, and then in each chapter I tried to leave the reader thinking of what is happening, right? And then as the chapters alternate, then they all come together at the end. But that suspense of building that story up, and you see what's happening on one side of the coin, what's happening on the other side, and then how my main character is caught in that middle. And then also you have the storyline of the FBI trying to figure out what is going on. So I think that back and forth and putting in short chapters that just keep the reader interested in that subplot and what's happening with those certain characters keeps the story moving fairly quickly. I've got a lot of positive feedback about the short chapters and also the pace of the book. And I had a couple ladies tell me last week that they would be reading the book, they'd look and they'd say, oh, well, this next chapter is only 3 pages. I'll stay up for 3 pages. And then they were 28 pages later and they were still up reading. So that was kind of interesting to hear that it kept them, interested that they couldn't go to sleep, So I think that's probably one of the biggest things is creating that suspense in kind of each chapter, but, something that the reader is thinking about, as it moved forward.
Well, besides your upcoming sequel, tell us about any other upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, so I actually am working on 2 upcoming books. One is the sequel, which it's going to be called Dissension, the Co-op. And the third book is actually going to be called Dissension: The Beginning, and it's going to take us back to when Papa Juan and El Senor are the heads of the cartel, and my main character is a teenager. So it'll take you back in time. So I'm actually working on them together. The third book, the beginning, I'm kind of in the outline stage and putting in notes and as things go along that come to my mind as I'm writing the second book. So those are the two things that I'm working on there. And then I still am involved heavily in the community with different projects and help with different charities, and then also kind of do, I guess, consulting, if you will, and in a couple like coaching aspects, but I'm not coaching really full time at this point.
Okay, well, so listeners can keep up with everything that you're up to. Throw out your contact info.
Yeah, so you could find me on Rodney Phillips author.com, and you'd be able to find some information there. And then feel free to email me. It's rphillips66@yahoo.com. And obviously, with me being from Pittsburgh, 66 is Mario Lemieux, shout out. So you could feel free to email me, or jump onto the website. As Curtis had mentioned, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Google Play. The audio will be out sometime next week as well. It's out right now in paperback and ebook. But yeah, feel free to touch base with me. I would love to interact with some of your listeners.
Well, I know you kind of mentioned your coaching career. Do you want to touch on that or expand on that in any way?
Yeah, so I uh, coaching for a long time. I coached defensive football, and I was a defensive coordinator in youth football, really up until the kids went to high school. So I really love coaching because you really can help young people, create confidence and leadership and things of that nature, and learn to work together as a team. And one of the things that I would always say to the kids is, if you're coachable, then you're employable, because a lot of the things that you learn in organized sports translate into a career or a job that you would get into, because you're always constantly working with teammates or colleagues, and you need to learn to work together. And like you said, sometimes you don't always see eye to eye, but you have to find a way to communicate and figure it out. And that's a lot, in a team aspect as well. And then I also coached boys and girls lacrosse. And really, when I first started coaching those, I was a football coach that learned lacrosse, right? So that was interesting at first, because the girls' rule book is probably 4 times larger than the boys' rule book for lacrosse. So that was really interesting. And with the girls, I tried to use a lot of quotes with strong females, like Estee Lauder and others, to motivate them and obviously help them overcome leadership or any competitive issues that they might have, and working together and being nervous, because sometimes what I found is a lot of young kids are nervous, right? And in football they're nervous to tackle, and then once they you teach them the proper tackling technique and they understand how to tackle, then you could see their confidence grow very quickly. But they all have nerves up front, so I really enjoyed coaching a lot and did it for a long period of time, and miss it, but I wouldn't have this book if I was still coaching, because my wife is like, you have to find something to do on the weekends, because now that you're not coaching, and I ended up pulling the book out and writing it, so.
We'll close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if that was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
Yeah, I think the only final thought that I would have is, it's never too late to pursue a dream, right? I started writing this book at 19 years old. It sat in my file cabinet for 37 years in notebooks. And then, have a conversation with my wife to find something to do since I wasn't coaching sports anymore. And, I pulled it out and finished a dream that I had when I was a teenager, and became a published author, so I feel like that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of is, I didn't forget about my dream, if you will, and I pursued what I wanted to get into. And, I have probably 6 to 8 years before I retire from my job, but I would love to do this in retirement. I have, like I said, a couple ideas that I'm working on for some other books that are in this series. And then I have a couple other ideas of, different stories that I would like to work on as well too. So I would love to, continue my writing journey when I, retire.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please be sure to check out the book and everything Robert's up to, or Rodney's up to. I know once the audio comes out, I'm definitely going to check it out. RodneyPhillipsAuthor.com. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And for suggestions and feedback, or if you know someone or you yourself would like to become a guest on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Rodney, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Curtis. This was great. And it's really nice to get to know you as well, bud.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.